Yep. No.
Just put a bar in it, because then you could have done the ZF. It doesn't fit.
It's not going to get started today. I just found $5 in Schrappers and a packet of Airwave gum.
Damn, boy. Turbo and manifold is on.
Proudly supported by Superior Engineering and Diesel Conversions Australia.
Right, we are back and we are working on the Patrol again today. Right beside me, we have the transmission. Now, I just got this thing back this week from Wholesale Automatics. It has been fully rebuilt and it has been built back a lot better than a standard box. Up front, we've got the billet torque converter from Wholesale Automatics. Inside the bottom of the pan, we have the Extreme valve body, and we also have had a full rebuild, so all new clutch packs, all new stuff inside. There's a whole lot of wizardry going on in this box. I don't understand it. If you're interested in finding out what was wrong with the transmission, Wholesale Automatics did a teardown video, so I suggest that you go and watch that because it was actually really interesting. Not only are we going to be slapping that in, but we also have this CompuShift TCM. Now these things are the bee's knees when it comes to trans controllers. With the 4J being automatic, it's actually not going to control the transmission for us, hence the CompuShift computer. These things are expensive, but when you weigh up what sort of features this has and how tunable it is, they're actually pretty well priced. So we've got to find a spot for this, get the transmission back in the car, do the flex plate, do the adapter plate, and hopefully we can just about get ready to start this thing. Right, now before we even think about lifting that transmission up into the Patrol, we need to fit up the adapter plate. Now this adapter plate makes the 4J mate to the RE4 transmission. It's a big bit of steel. You can notice it's two colors. That's because I ran out of black, so we're running silver on one side. This plate here makes everything possible, which is really cool. So we need to get that bolted up to the back of the 4J. That'll allow the transmission to mount to the back of this. But before we even do that, we need to fit up what's called the flex plate. So this has the ring gear for the starter, and it also bolts to the torque converter. Now, both of these parts are from Diesel Conversions Australia. Really well made stuff, and we're gonna start by putting that into the car so that we can lift the transmission up. Right, so this tool is seating over the rear main seal right there. So what I need to do is evenly tighten up these bolts, and we're going to press that seal into the housing. That was a bloody mission, but the seal is in. I did actually destroy the first one. I had to go to Repco, get another one, but we got it in and it's all sitting nice and flush. So it's time to move on to our adapter plate, which is this big chunk of steel right here. Now that is going to adapt our transmission to the back of the motor. So I'm going to quickly whack that up. So they are now all loosely sitting in the hole, so I'll pull one out at a time. Red Loctite and whack it back in, torque her up. Adapter plate is done. Time for the flex plate. Right, so before I get this transmission up under the Patrol, we are actually going to fit this transfer case here. Now, the main reason I'm going to fit this and do it all in one piece is because the converter is so heavy that when I lift this transmission up, it actually tilts to the front. So I'm hoping that this transfer case will kind of level it out. We've got Jesse here giving us a hand today, which is going to be great because these are like 250 kilos plus whatever that weighs, so it's bloody heavy stuff. But yeah, we're going to bolt that on and then start thinking about how we're going to strap that up. A lot of people use the engine crane through the tunnel in the car here, straight through that gap there. The other thing that is really important, which I've already gone and checked, is the setback of the torque converter. So the torque converter can actually move back and forward, and you have to have enough clearance because when the torque converter gets really, really hot, it'll actually expand. So we need about 4 millimeters of what's called setback. I did actually go ahead and measure that yesterday. So I've gone ahead and done my measurements. I wrote them down here. We had 18 millimeters from the flex plate to the adapter plate. We had 21.5 millimeters from the face of the transmission to the mounting face on the torque converter. And you subtract that, and we're left with 3.5, which is very close to 4. So we'll lift this up, smack her on now, and figure out a way to strap it up. Oh, that is heavy.
Yeah, hang on, I'll try and get one side. You alright?
Yep.
Hang on.
Just putting some anti-seize on these bolts here just so that they're easy to take out when we destroy the transmission and have to remove it again. No, we won't be doing that. Right, the transfer case is now bolted up to the transmission. Wish it was black, but hey, it's under the car, we're not gonna see it. Bolts are just tight, the bottom bolts aren't done, we'll do them when we get in there, but now we have to do the mission part of trying to strap this up. The transfer case on this side, it wants to tilt to the left there, so if we strap it up, there's a good chance it's gonna try and roll over on us, which is not gonna be fun. So we'll try and get it really well balanced, get it under the car, lift it up. It's gonna be real awkward to film it, but we'll try our best to get something on camera. Transmission doesn't fit under the sliders, so I've got to lift the front of the car up, then we're going to slide it under, and we'll drop the front of the car back down. Right, we can fit the transmission under now. Engineering at its best, Jesse decided to wrap that round just so we can hold the motor, because it's kind of like floppy in there. We don't want that falling forward on us. So we've got the jack under the car, now we can slide it completely under, then we can figure out how we're going to lift it up into the tunnel. All right, hopefully there's no sketchy police in the comments today, because we have the crane going through into that tunnel, and then under there we've got the transmission all strapped up. We've got one around the transfer case and one around the front of the bell housing. Then to get the angle of the motor, we have that hanging from the top, so we can just ratchet this strap tighter and it'll actually tilt the motor, and if we loosen it, it'll bring the motor back this way. If we can get the transmission off the ground and at least get jacks and blocks of wood and stuff under it, it's going to be, it's going to work. It's going to work. I can already tell it's going to work. So we're halfway putting the trans in, and we've realised that we probably should put the cross member on, because it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to balance everything. But before this cross member goes in, the tail shaft is notorious for hitting here on full flex. So I'm actually going to notch this out. Basically, you've got to cut that, cut along the side, get rid of that bit of steel. This is a tiny little bit of steel that I've got laying around that's just an old bracket off something. Basically, just going to weld that in there, get rid of that. That way we can have heaps of flex and the tail shaft's not going to get bound up. So we'll quickly do that, bolt it onto the trans, then we can get that dog up in there. Right, that is all notched up. You can see how much room we've gained just for doing that, but I had to use 2 bits of steel. It's just painted in silver because I don't have any black left. We'll whack that under the transmission, and that'll just help us balance it on each side. Right, I've actually got the transmission just about bolted up to the motor, but what I wanted to do first is check the torque converter. Now, if the torque converter is not right, the transmission has to come back out. You obviously need to spin the torque converter in order to get the flex plate bolts in, or torque converter bolts, but through the flex plate. But I can't actually spin the torque converter at the moment, so it's either bound up or I just can't get in there enough, because we are only going through the starter motor hole. But if you can see down there, you can see we're all joined up to the motor there, and you can see the adapter plate, and then through this little inspection hole here, which I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see, but there's a tiny little starter hole up in there. You can see the teeth on the flex plate there. That's what I have to get the bolts into. If we can manage to spin the converter, then we can go ahead, put all the bolts in the adapter plate, and basically we'll be done with the transmission. We just got to lock everything up with bolts and nuts. But if we can't get that torque converter spinning, then we will have to actually drop the box off, figure out why it's not turning around, and go from there. So hopefully we're not going to get into that. We are hopefully about to get under there. Might have to give it a couple of love taps with a mallet or something like that, and hopefully it's going to free up and I can spin it around. This torque converter doesn't fit. We tried to fit it and it doesn't fit. The torque converter hits the bolts on the flex plate and it doesn't fit. So what we need to do is we're going to take some more measurements, and I just spoke to Rod from Wholesale Automatics. He's been helping us out today massively, so if you're watching, Rod, thanks heaps, mate. But what we need to do is make this fit. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to take a few measurements. We're then going to take those measurements and the bolts to a machine shop, get them to lathe down the bolts, and then we're going to test fit it all back up, and hopefully it'll work. The disappointing thing about that is I haven't uploaded a video in 2 weeks, and it's probably going to take another week to get all this done. So the build's on hold, guys. We've got to make sure this all works, because if we actually finish bolting that up just then, which we were actually contemplating on doing, none of it would have worked, and we would have been back here pulling this whole thing apart and rebuilding the box again. So kind of like bittersweet at the moment. Like, I'm really glad we found the problem, but I'm also really bummed out that it's not in there and working at the moment, because we would have been so close to firing the thing up. But yeah, what we're going to do is quickly slap this under the car. We're going to use feeler gauges, figure out the distance between this and the flex plate. I thought I'd bring you under here to show you what is actually going on, but this here is the flex plate. This is the adapter plate. This is the torque converter. So we basically have this spigot here that needs to go up into a hole on the flex plate there. So if we lift this heavy thing up and stick it in, there we go. You can actually see that it's rocking back and forth. It's not sitting flat. This has to sit perfectly flat, and you should be able to pull it in just with your fingers. You shouldn't have any resistance or anything, you know, obstructing this getting flat onto this. But all the bolts, all 8 of them, are touching our torque converter. Basically, it just means that we have to take off the gap that we are getting here off the face of these bolts, refit up everything, retest it, re-put the box in. So today has been a complete waste of time. I notched a cross member in a 40-degree shed, and it took me 9 hours. There'll be someone commenting that right now. They'll be literally typing in the comments.
Should have done the Duramax.
Why didn't you just put a barra in it? Because then you could have done a ZF, and it all just would have bolted up. Yeah, look, mate. You're probably right. Right, it's the next week, and right here is the flex plate. Now, in the last clips, you would have seen that we had a clearance issue. Now, I've actually gone ahead and had the bolts machined down nice and flat. So you can see they've taken 2.5 mil off the top and 1 mil off the washer. Now, the downside to that is there's obviously hardly any hex for me to get a socket on. So I also had a socket ground down on the front here. You can see that they've just taken the taper off the edge here, because most sockets have a little taper on them. So now we've got this really nice snug fit. It's still tight, like it's still not ideal. You'd really want more bolt head than that. But I think we're going to be able to make this work with our flywheel, and it's going to allow the torque converter to get put up onto the motor. So I've gone ahead and cleaned all these bolts. I've also just surfaced the flywheel to make sure everything's going to sit nice and flat. But what we're going to do, jump under there, re-Loctite this back on and torque it up. I'm then going to take the torque converter back out of the transmission and sit it back up on this face. We're going to make sure that it's sitting flush onto the flex plate. If we still have a clearance issue, we're going to have to put little washers in between the torque converter and the flex plate, but we're going to cross that bridge if we have to. But for now, we just need to get this up and see if it all fits. Right, good news, the bolts torqued up nice and tight. So I've done them all up to 100 foot-pounds or newton meters. I think it was foot-pounds. But all nice and tight. Now, we did just test fit the converter. It fits perfectly flush. We can't even fit the smallest feeler gauge in between it, which means that it is sitting hard up against that flex plate. It's really hard to film under there, so we're just going to go ahead and fit everything up now. We've got the converter back into the transmission. I do need to check that it's in the right spot. I did take some measurements before and just make sure it hasn't moved forward. Then got to get the crane out, do the same trick, the crane and the jack under the front, get it up nice and square to the back of the motor, mount this transmission up finally. You rushed me. Right, now it is the next day. Now the transmission is in. Jesse and I were burning the midnight oil. We're up till about 1 AM getting this all buttoned up. Got the torque converter done up. We have the drive shafts on, a few little bits and pieces tidied up underneath. Now I'll quickly show you guys as I'm moving this crank over with this breaker bar. You can see nothing's binding up. We've got no noises, No scraping sounds, which is good. Now, before we put the starter motor and the turbo and manifold on, I actually need to wire up this transmission. Now, Wholesale Autos have gone ahead and wired up all the plugs onto the transmission, which is mint, but we still need to wire it into the car.
God, this car is good. It just keeps on giving back. I just found $5 in Schrappers and a packet of Airwave gum. Now, I've got the center console out because I was struggling to find a spot to actually mount this CompuShift controller. And if we come around the back here, you can see where my treasure is just there, but underneath there is the CompuShift. Now, it is a pretty good spot because it all fits under there and it's nice and dry and in the cab. And the other good reason is all the wires can be really, really short. Now I can shorten them up because my TC lockup switch is going to go right here, and a few other bits and pieces is going to go in that sort of area. So I think I can run a hole saw through the plate that the shifter holds onto as well to get the wires down to the transmission. So we're looking pretty good. Now I've got to move on to the wiring. It's looking like a little bit of a headache, but I'm trying to figure it out. I've got the installation guide here and I'm also sort of doing some Googling at the same time. So give me a second, figure out the wiring, I'll mount some more stuff up and then I'll get back to you. I'm just about finished this TCM wiring. There is a few little things that I do need to call Wholesale Autos about just to double check and make sure that I'm wiring this up the right way. But if you look in here, we are basically wired up. There's a few just little ones that, yeah, I need to figure out where they're going, but we are just about there. Now, obviously, we've got the TCM module mounted up under there and all the wires are coming out either side of it. Now, right here, you will see that I've actually drilled the 2 grommets into the floor and they are going down to our transmission. Now, I've plugged everything in. That's the wiring harness just hanging down there. So yeah, that's all plugged in and it's just about wired up on this top end. I've just got to figure out what these wires are going to. I've also hooked up the power and the ground up under the dash and I've got the ignition turned on it at the moment. Now this is the little screen. I've got this hooked up as well so you can see got a few readouts there. I've also got the Bluetooth app hooked up and it's reading as well. So the whole system is actually working. I need to call Wholesale Autos tomorrow, figure out the rest of the wiring before I button that up. I don't want to screw anything down just in case I'm wrong with a few things. So once I call them and confirm, that can all get locked down and screwed down and we are good to go. Now everything underneath the car to do with the transmission is basically hooked up. I've done the breather lines, I've done the hard cooler pipes, I've checked over the transmission, nut and bolts, everything is tight and done up. So I want to finish off the trans cooler lines. I've got the fittings now to plumb it up, so I'm going to bowl that one over next. So at the front of the car, this is the trans cooler here. Now underneath here are the threads. They are special ORB fittings, so I've got 2 of them. I then need to connect it to the lines here using 5/16 line, get that under the car, and I basically need to hook it up to those 2 barbs there. I've actually made that little bracket and hook those hard lines up. They used to bolt to the side of the ZD30, but just made a quick little bracket and now they're sitting there. I don't think it'll matter for the in and the out, but I will be blowing out all the lines once I'm fitting everything up. But I'm gonna go ahead and plumb this dog up. Right, just take these brackets off, just give me some room. Just gonna quickly blow these lines out, make sure there's nothing in them. These here are the special ORB fittings that I'll be using, and this is the barb to go on top, so we'll have it like that. When tightening fittings like this, they are a special cone and seat style fitting, so they don't need any Loctite, thread tape, anything like that. And you don't need to go overly crazy with how tight you're going. You just nip them up until they feel good and should be right. Try and find the best route for this hose. Right, so you can see there we've got the new plumbing going down to some of the old stuff, so that looks really good. That's actually as far as we can get with the transmission side of things, so it's time to move on to finally fitting this turbo up and hopefully for the last time. You guys remember this exhaust manifold from Modified Explorer. This thing is absolutely mint. Now I've already gone ahead and heat wrapped it because it's quite close to some coolant lines, so I want to sort of protect everything as much as possible so the heat wrap is staying on. I don't really think it looks that bad either. I think it actually looks pretty cool. Now, if you've never changed a stud over, what I do is I back 2 nuts up on each other. Now, if they're flanged, you put them on like this first, but one facing the wrong way, one facing the right way, and back them up against each other
and tighten them up. You tighten them, they become locked together like that. Then you can just go ahead and screw it in as hand tight as you can get it. Then you just drive it in like a normal bolt. Right, out the old, in with the new. The manifold is done, so it's time to fit this turbo up. Now, while it's on the bench, what I want to do is do the oil feed line and the oil drain line. So that is this for the oil drain with the gasket, and the oil feed line is just a little fitting at the top. That's going to allow us to flow oil through this thing. There is also coolant passages on this. I don't think I will be running coolant through the turbo. I don't think it's going to need it. So I'll probably just have to bung those two off eventually, but I can at least go ahead and fit this oil stuff. I'm just going to put a dab of blue Loctite on this fitting. All right, turbo time. So gasket first, goes like that. Right, last bolt is in the worst spot, but getting it tight. Turbo is on. Right, so now I've got to hook up my turbo feed line, which is gonna go something like this. Might have to leave this loose because I don't really know where the dump pipe's going. Damn, boy. Turbo and manifold is on. I actually can't believe how bloody good that turbo looks. It's perfect size, maybe a bit too big, but we're gonna live with it. Full boost is coming. Now, I did have to shorten that turbo line a little bit, but it goes down to a little banjo fitting that's down there, and all of that came from Modified Explorer, as well as the turbo and the manifold. So if you guys are in the market for a new turbo, manifold, turbo lines, injectors, anything like that, you can go see Modified Explorer. You can find him on Facebook and online and on Instagram. Massive shout out to him for helping me out. He's actually set this up and sent it out just for me to test fit. I haven't even paid for it yet. So huge thanks to Modified Explorer. Now, as for the rest of it, tomorrow morning, I'll probably come in the shed and I'll get on the phone to Wholesale. I'll see if I can finish up the wiring. Really was hoping to start it this weekend, but because of the trans and TC not fitting up, it's thrown us back about a week or a fortnight, which is all right. This sort of stuff happens with these builds, and I was definitely expecting it at some point, but we've definitely made some good progress lately. We're not far off starting. In fact, I think the next video will be firing this thing up, and hopefully everything is installed properly and we're not going to have an issue. Now, the conversion parts that I've been using to make this build possible are all from Diesel Conversions Australia. So if you are thinking about putting a 4J in a Patrol, bloody good idea if you ask me. Definitely go to Diesel Conversions Australia's website, check out their kits. They've got a whole wide array of like different parts that you can use. You don't have to use them all, but the kit that I've got is the whole kit and caboodle, and I definitely recommend doing it that way. And as for the rest of you lot, cheers for watching. We will see you on the next episode, where hopefully we are turning the key and we're gonna get some full boost. No, we're not gonna get full boost till we get it tuned. We will be getting a little bit of boost and hopefully a lot of bit of noise coming out of this motor. Not bad noise though, good noise. Now, I'll see you guys on the next episode. Obviously, I'm delirious. Been 5 days filming this episode, but anyway, we got there, and we're going.